I'd like to begin tonight with the following land acknowledgement. I am a grateful but uninvited visitor to the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, past and present, including the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, and the Duwamish peoples. That's right. I acknowledge the land occupied by the University of Washington, Seattle, and land on which I live, learn, and practice as Coast Salish land. I recognize that this land acknowledgement to be only one small act in the ongoing process of understanding and opposing the systemic oppression and historic and contemporary erasure of indigeneity and indigenous peoples. Good evening. Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yvette Moy, and I'm the University of Washington's Director of Public Lectures, and I'm here to welcome you this evening. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin tonight's event, I do need to run through a few housekeeping items. And the first one is, if you haven't done so already, like me, please turn off your cell phone, silence it. We ask that you also refrain from video or audio recording this evening's lecture. It is being recorded, and it will be rebroadcast and up on our YouTube page for 2 weeks. All you have to do is look for the UW Office of Public Lectures YouTube page, and you'll find us. We also ask that you refrain from taking photographs of our speaker while they're on stage. If you have any questions for our speaker tonight, you can email them in, or you can go to the aisle microphones that are over here, and the email address that you can send them to is mayiask@uw.edu. We will have a book signing this evening with Dr. Wall Kimmerer, and so if you haven't purchased your book already, you'll be able to do so in here, and the signing will take place here. And then finally, if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself to your next door neighbor. Make a new friend tonight. Y'all are a friendly bunch. But if we want to get to the lecture, we're going to have to figure this out. So let's go. And tonight, you are joining us for the Office of Public Lectures' final lecture of this academic year. I really am proud of all the work that we've done, and I'm super excited to end it on such a high note with our speaker. And tonight we will welcome SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry's distinguished teaching professor and director in the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, as well as the MacArthur Genius Award recipient, Robin Wall Kimmerer. She will be introduced by one of our very own UW graduate students, Bryce Lewis-Smith. Be gentle, he's very nervous. He hasn't done this before. He told me he was nervous. I'm just helping him out. And he is working on a degree from the University of Washington School of Marine and Environmental Affairs. And Bryce is also a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Got it right. We want to thank our campus partners as well, including the Program on the Environment, the School of the Environmental and Forest Sciences, the Department of American Indian Studies, and UW Earth Lab, who helped us out to make this event possible. We also want to thank our amazing volunteers. Tonight, UW employee Nicole and her mom, Sandy, came in to help, as well as our UWRA retirees who came back to help the university, Beth, Haiti, Chris, and Jules. And we also want to thank our student intern, Mino. I want to wish you all a very safe and happy and healthy summer, and be sure to follow us on our socials for updates about our next year's lineup. And with that, please welcome Bryce Lewis-Smith.
You know, I think you saying that I was nervous made me a little bit more nervous, you know. Bojo Jayak, Mino Gijgat Nagom, Bryce Nadeznikas, Bodawadmi, Mina Anishinaabe Nadal, Nakomis, O Kip Kwa. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bryce Lewis Smith. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm also a graduate student here at the University of Washington School of Marine and Environmental Affairs. I also work for the Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies here to support our Native faculty, staff, students, and local communities through Indigenous knowledge and community programming. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer as the keynote speaker for the Dance Lecture Series. Dr. Kimmerer is an American Distinguished Teaching Professor at the State University of New York's Colleges of Environmental Science and Forestry, where she is also the director for the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment. Among her many accolades and awards, Dr. Kimmerer was recently named a MacArthur Fellow in 2022. She is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. I got to spend this morning with her, walking around campus and meeting with our Indigenous community. During our conversations, my colleague and good friend, Socorro Powell of the Freedmen Cherokee, asked Robin, if she were a plant, which species would she be? After some thinking, Robin responded that she would be a sugar maple because of their nourishing and giving nature. This is the embodiment of the teachings of braiding sweetgrass and our Potawatomi ways of being. Walk as if every step is a greeting to Mother Earth, and to honor our relations, past, present, and future, through upholding our Anishinaabe relations of reciprocity. As a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Robin has represented our peoples well by amplifying the importance of Indigenous knowledge in combating climate change and healing the land. Auntie Robin's writing in Braiding Sweetgrass challenges the erasure of Indigenous ways of knowing from environmental science and asks readers, if you are grateful for the gifts of a Segmekwe, Mother Earth, what are you going to do about it? In Bodowadme Moen, our ancestral language, our word for corn, Madamen, translates to that miraculous seed. I want to thank Auntie Robin for sharing sweetgrass and planting the Madamen of Indigenous knowledge at the forefront of the environmental movement as a challenge to the traditional Western science, which has excluded our voices far too long. Chimagwech, Auntie, for all the good work that you do, that you have done and continue to do. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer to the stage. Igwen.
Situated here. Thank you. Miigwech, what a wonderful, warm welcome. And Bryce, Chimagwech, for those beautiful words. So I was so pleased to meet you and to spend time with the community today. Could somebody who knows what they're doing help? Oh, I can see the slides there, but not here. If we could make that happen, that'd be super. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, now that we've got that out of the way, I want to say Tiwal Bojo and Dinowe Maganadok, Shabadas Kegish Kokwenu Deshnakas, Bodwe Wadme Kwenda, Megazedo Dem, meanwhile Mako Do Dem. Syracuse, New York, Nadoch Bia, Shishibanyak, Nabendagwes, Miigwech Kinegego, Gamijang. And I am just a beginner in our Potawatomi language, but it is an endangered species, and our teachers ask us to breathe life into it at every chance that we get. And so what I've told you is that my name is Light Shining Through Sky Woman. I'm a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation and of the Bear Clan and of the Eagles as well. I live today near Syracuse, New York, and I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. I also want to advance my slides. Technology is our friend. There we go. Maybe I can do it from the, is there a keyboard? No worries. But while we're working on that, it is also our protocol, our traditional protocol, that we always begin with gratitude. We say that gratitude is our first responsibility as human people. And so could we all remember this morning when we first put our feet on Shkakmikwe, that we had everything that we needed she's given to us, that we had that first breath of flower-scented morning air, we had a drink of cool water, we had the companionship of clouds and birds and trees around us, and the companionship of one another. How lucky we are. And when we raise our voices in thanks for the gifts of Mother Earth, we also turn our attention to our own commitments to say, could we live in such a way that the earth will be grateful for us?
I'm really bad at my job.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
There you go.
Let's try that. Chimigwet. Thank you. I also want to tell you a little bit of where I come from. I am a Potawatomi, and our homelands are in the Great Lakes, but I live today amidst my Haudenosaunee neighbors. Onondaga Nation, who you see on the map, is just over my back fence line. So I am so blessed to live in Haudenosaunee territory, the center of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of land, of history, and certainly of knowledge of how it is that we care for the earth. I also want to show you a different map of where I am from in the Great Lakes territories within the traditional Potawatomi homelands that adjoin those of the Haudenosaunee in what is now called New York State. What I want you to notice in this almost borderless map is that two different nations, two different confederacies, the Anishinaabe Confederacy and the Haudenosaunee, share this generous landscape. And long before settlers came here, we had to have an agreement about how two very different nations would live together in this shared homeland. And so the agreement that we put forward, you see here, this is the Nagan Gebejik Mkwan. This treaty belt is a written document that commemorates our agreements for how it is that we will live together as two different nations. In this treaty belt, woven of quahog shell wampum beads, what you see in the center in the purple is the shape of a dish. This is the nagan, the bowl, the dish. And we say that we live in a territory that Mother Earth fills for us as if it was a big bowl. And in this way, we acknowledge with gratitude everything that we have been given. And we also recognize that it is our responsibility to keep that bowl full, to keep that bowl clean, and that both of our nations, even though we're different from one another, share a responsibility for the earth who takes care of us. Also notice in the center of the dish, there's that white bar. That's the Bejik Mkwan, the one spoon, the Mkwan. And it's so important that it is a dish with one spoon. There's not a big spoon for some people and a little spoon for others. There are two nations, but there are not two spoons. This is a statement about sharing, isn't it? This is a statement about justice. This is the intersection of ecology and cultural social justice as well. My colleague and friend from the Tuscarora Nation, Neil Patterson, calls this, his people have a copy of this belt, as do our people, and he calls this the oldest conservation policy on the planet. And I know here at UW, so many of you are involved in sustainability fields, so I'm sure that you studied this. It's on page 1 of your textbook, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and we have to think about why not? Why isn't it? Let me also say that when Bryce and I both said to you, bonjour, how many of you, want a show of hands, thought we were speaking French badly? Thank you. Thank you for being honest about that and for entertaining the question, why is it that we feel we have more fluency with a language that came from across the ocean than one that is spoken here in this territory? This issue of erasure that my nephew spoke of is our collective work as settlers and as original peoples to combat that erasure. You know, when we think about that bowl or that basket full of berries, we live in a world that in Western ways of thinking would term that basket of berries or that dish that Mother Earth fills for us as natural resources, as if berries are our property, just waiting to be transformed for our use. In the ecological sciences, we might call them ecosystem services, as if they were somehow the inevitable outcome of some kind of ecological machine. But to traditional peoples, probably to all human people, what they should represent is gifts. These are gifts from the other more than human beings with whom we share the planet. In fact, I love to use this photograph because our word for berry, min, in Potawatomi, is the same root as our word for gift. Isn't that beautiful? The language is so full of poetry, it reminds us that the earth does not belong to us. These are gifts for us from the more than human people. And even though we live in this world where Shkopmikwe showers us with gifts every single day, we also know that we live enmeshed in social institutions and certainly in an economy that is relentless in asking us, what more can we take from the earth? Despite this shower of gifts. And I think that the question that we need is, what does the earth ask of us? What is our responsibility in return for these gifts? And you know, it seems to me that for the past couple of centuries, which honestly is just an eye blink of time in human history, isn't it? This industrial colonial era. In this era, it's as if we've been doing some kind of crazy experiment. This crazy experiment that has very tangible manifestations. We have unwittingly asked, what would happen if we believed in this pyramid of human exceptionalism? What if there was just one species, and please note, some members of one species, which out of the millions that inhabit the earth, was somehow more deserving of all the richness of the earth than any other? And not only that, in this experiment, this social ecological experiment we've been doing, the ecological laws that constrain growth for all other species, they don't apply to us. We are pretending that the laws of thermodynamics have been repealed on behalf of a single species at the top of that pyramid. And the experiment tests the hypothesis of what would happen if we behaved as if the earth was nothing more than stuff, and the stuff all belonged to us. This strictly materialist, utilitarian view of the earth. All that stuff belongs to us. And you know, the results of that experiment are in, aren't they? When we find ourselves teetering at the edge of climate catastrophe, entering what evolutionary biologists have called the age of the sixth extinction. In this time of crisis, what does the earth ask of us? The earth asks us to change. And yet, much of our environmental discourse is about changing light bulbs. Don't get me wrong, new technologies are going to be an important response to the crises that we face. But as a scientist, I don't think it's only new technology or new knowledge that we need, new policy, or in fact, even more money. If we are to survive, and if our more than human relatives are to survive along with us, we need to change a lot more than light bulbs. We need a change in world view. A change in world view, changing of minds and hearts that is beyond the purview of Western science to do that work. The worldview change that we need is to rethink, what does land mean? And if you take a moment to think about the ways that land is understood within the Western paradigm, land is capital, isn't it? Because land is a source of natural resources, and land is understood as property. And when you own land, you have exclusive rights to it. You could take care of it or you could wreck it, either one, because it's yours. You determine the fate of that land and all of the beings who live there. Sometimes we think about land as a source of ecosystem services. But what about in the Indigenous paradigm? Is this how we think about land? This is the settler view of land. For many Indigenous peoples, and I can't generalize for all 563 different nations who are here just in what is today called the United States, but there are some parallels in which land is understood as the source of our identity. People are inseparable from land. Land is certainly understood as the ones who take care of us, the ones who sustain us. Land isn't just our home, it's the home of our more than human relatives as well. Land is the gift that our ancestors gave to us, and it is the gift that we must pass on as ancestors to be good ancestors ourselves. Here in a university, it's important to remember that through the Indigenous lens, what's the real source of knowledge? Land. Land is the authority. Land has all the teachings that we need. Land is the library, and land is the pharmacy too. The land is the healer for ills that are physical, spiritual, emotional as well. Because the land is inspirited, because the land is our home, and land is not understood as a place for which we claim rights with money. Land is the place for which we humbly accept moral responsibility. We are looking at rights-based cultures versus responsibility-based cultures. My Haudenosaunee neighbors who, as you know, the Haudenosaunee were really important in the formation of the US Constitution. And some of my Haudenosaunee historian friends say, well, yeah, the US, those founding fathers listened to a lot of what we had to say, but they got one thing wrong. They wrote a Bill of Rights instead of a Bill of Responsibility. Because the land is sacred. I think that we are living in an era of profound error, because for most of humans' time on the planet, before this great delusion of human exceptionalism, we lived in cultures that understood ourselves not as masters of the universe, but as younger brothers of creation. And this scientific worldview, which has so dominated our landscape like a monoculture for the last 500 years, has certainly yielded tremendous gains in quality of life and understanding, without question. It's brought huge advances in knowledge, but it is not more knowledge that we need at this moment. It's wisdom. And in order to find that wisdom, we need to look at the world not only through the lens of Western worldview, but through the lens of the Indigenous worldview as well. This wonderful graphic created by one of my graduate students exemplifies a model of education known as two-eyed seeing, in which we train ourselves, we combat erasure. We say there are multiple ways to look at the world. Let's not just look at the world through the monoculture of one lens, but have real two-eyed seeing. And if you think for a second about why do we have two eyes? What is the significance of having two eyes? It gives us depth perception, doesn't it? Yeah, that's why we have two eyes. Imagine the depth of our understanding of our relationships to the world that might be achieved when we look at the world through multiple lenses. And within the Indigenous worldview, within the Potawatomi way of knowing, this is a model of our ways of knowing, of knowledge. We are reminded that each of us, human people, have the gifts of understanding the world with body, mind, emotion, and spirit. I think about elders who have said, well, we're going to have to walk around the fire on this one, meaning we're going to have to know and use all of these ways of knowing. And Western science, as a scientist myself, I know, right, that body and mind, intellect and physicality, we use those as valid sources of evidence, but we exclude spirit and emotion from our ways of generating knowledge. There are good reasons for that, but the crises that we face lie at the intersection of human values and sciences. And so we need to use all of these ways of knowing. All of these ways of knowing to achieve this model of how we might live in the world, not human exceptionalism, lonely at the top of a fictional pyramid, but to know that we sit within a circle, recognizing that we're not at the top of a pyramid, but we are a member of a democracy of species governed by interdependence, governed by natural law. And you know, this time that we find ourselves in, this urgent time of crisis and great choices, has been spoken of by our ancestors. And I want to share with you just a tiny fragment of a really important teaching of our Anishinaabe peoples, which is known as the prophecies of the people of the seventh fire. It is a long, beautiful, complicated teaching, but I'll just share a tiny bit. It is in a sense, the history of our people, in which each fire represents a different historical era among our people. And so part of this, Eddie Benton Benai's wonderful Mishomis book offers us this map. This is a migration story because it said that in the time of the first fire, our Potawatomi people lived among our Wabanaki relatives at the mouth of the St. Lawrence. And we all lived together long before those white sails were seen in the east. But in the Dawnlands, a prophet arose among the people who said, big changes are going to come here to Turtle Island, and we need to be ready for them. In fact, our way of being ready for them is to send the sacred fire away from the coasts, to send the sacred fire to the west, walking until we come to the place where the food grows on the water. And so reluctantly, our people, some of the people, loaded their canoes and began moving to the west in order to safeguard the sacred fire from what was to come. And through those periods of the fires, they settled at various points along this journey, this long historical migration that you see here. There are teachings about the time when new people would come here, the Zaganash, the newcomers would come here and separate our people from the land. The prophet said this would happen, and we know that it did. And so the people moved along. And then teachers arose among the people who said, you better keep moving because there are going to be black robes coming among our people trying to break our spiritual tradition. Keep moving. And we know that that came to pass. It was foretold that there would come a time when our children would be taken from us, when our language would be taken from us. And we know that all of that, too, has come to pass through the time of these fires. But it is also said that there will come a time when our people stand at a fork in the road. And in various teachings, it's said that it is all of us, the Zaganash, the newcomers, as well as the original peoples, will be standing at a fork in the road. And you know, when I think about that, and in my imagination, I think about one of those paths as long and soft grass. It's all dewy and moist, and you could walk barefoot there. And the other path's a dead end. And it's made of cinders that are burnt that would cut your feet. We know which path we want to walk down, don't we? We know which of these forks that we want to take. the spiritual path of care for one another, of kinship with the living world, or that path of materialism and greed, which is a dead end. It is said that in this time of the seventh fire, there will come a time when you can no longer dip your cup into the river and drink. That there will come a time when the air is too thick to breathe, and that our plant and animal relatives will begin to turn their faces away from us. At that moment, we'll stand at this fork. That too has come to pass, hasn't it? And so these teachings that say we have to make a choice, well, that seems easy, doesn't it? All we have to do is go trotting down that soft green path. But the teachings, the brilliance of these teachings are to say, no, that is not what we have to do. What we have to do is walk backwards, walk along that ancestor's path, and pick up the things some people say that were dropped, that were left behind. Those were not dropped or left behind. They were taken. It is our job to pick up those things that were taken. Each of us, we can't pick up all of it. The songs, the stories, the worldview, the teachings, our plant and animal relatives. No one of us can do all of that. It's why we need each other. But when we have each picked up that which we love too much to lose, then together we can walk down that green path together to the other side, to the lighting of the eighth fire, the fire of continued thriving, of continuity of life in this beautiful place. And these prophecies guide me every day to know that we are seventh fire people, you and me. This is our work in the time of climate change. And you know, in this time of great crisis and great choices, I don't know about you, but I'm really longing for a grandma. I'm longing for a wise grandma who could help to guide us along that ancestor's path. But you know, we have that grandma because in many Indigenous traditions, we are told that plants are our oldest teachers, that they were left here for us in order that we might learn from us, or that we might learn from them. They are our oldest teachers. They've been on Earth far, far longer than we have. Imagine their creativity. I mean, we with our amazing technology, anybody here know how to take light and air and water and turn it into food? And then give it away? Anybody here know how to make medicines of every kind and then you give them away for free? The plants are amazing teachers. They model the generosity, reciprocity, creativity that we as human people can learn from. Our oldest teachers. And think about this. What if you were a teacher who had great knowledge, but you had no voice to speak it, and you had no pen to write it, and yet there was something that you really needed to say? Plants tell their stories not by what they say, but by what they do. And the name for plants in Anishinaabemowin, all the plants, is Mishkikin. Mishkikin means the medicines. All the plants are understood as medicine. Not all the medicine is for us, but they're all medicine. And when you take that word Mishkikin apart in the language, what it actually means is the strength of the earth. Plants are named the strength of the earth, and that's how we are healed. We are healed with the strength of the earth. And so in this time, when the warmest years ever recorded, when glaciers are melting and the extinction rate is depleting our bird population by 70% in the last 50 years, we are in trouble, right? But the plants, if we look to these teachers, what might they tell us? Because one of the hallmarks of Indigenous knowledge systems is that we're surrounded by intelligences that are not our own. We don't have to figure everything out on our own. There are teachers here who could help us. And this is grounded in the understanding of the personhood of more than human relations. That they're not things, they're not just species, they are persons. We'll say more about that later. But this leads us to the new, so-called new, field of biomimicry. I suspect there are biomimetic scientists here at the university. And these forward-thinking scientists are basing their research on the notion that we could innovate new sustainability solutions based on what plants and animals could tell us. In this new discipline of learning from the land is really powerful. But also for me disappointing, because fairly predictably, the science of biomimicry is so far focused on learning what new products might be made from natural resources. When what really interests me about biomimicry is what the plants might teach us about how we might live. If plants are our teachers in this time of crisis, what could they teach us about responses to climate change if we were willing to listen and learn? Because plants know what to do about climate change. They don't dither in ineffectual meetings and debate carbon tax structures. They just get to work. And they can be a model for the transformation that we need. I mean, think about it. They have already converted to 100% solar economy. Now, you have probably heard that entrepreneur Richard Branson has established the Virgin Earth Prize, the Virgin Earth Challenge, I think it's actually called, to spur the design, biomimetic design of new technologies that could remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it while we are transitioning to a fossil fuel-free, carbon-free economy. It's a really lofty goal. It engages our human ingenuity, science, and engineering on behalf of the planet. And the prize is $25 million. Not too bad. You gonna start? You gonna get to work on that? Human ingenuity, again, will be part of the solution. But we have to keep in mind that there already is a system that pulls carbon from the atmosphere and stores it for centuries. And it has even more bells and whistles. It generates oxygen at the same time. It purifies water. It protects biodiversity. It builds soil. And it makes us feel so happy. And it's called a forest. I say give the prize to the trees. Because you know, plants don't put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, they take it out. And they sequester it in long-term storage of biomass in tree trunks and 12-foot deep roots of prairie grasses, in the organic matter of peat bogs. After all, what are coal and oil but the lives of plants that sequestered that carbon for us and stored it away, until we decided to rip up the earth and burn up eons of stored fossil carbon in just a few centuries. Plants know, keep it in the ground. Plants have been sequestering carbon since the beginning, removing it from the air and putting it into the ground. What do plants do when the climate changes? They actually grow faster when there's more CO2. This is called the CO2 fertilization effect. But as hard as they might try, they might photosynthesize faster, but pretty soon, and that's really pretty soon, they run out of other things that they need, like nitrogen and water, and they simply can't use all of that carbon dioxide as everything else becomes ever in shorter supply, including the soil. But we know that plants don't degrade the soil, they build it. Plants don't degrade water, they purify it. And when we stand in a shower of spring rain, I don't have to tell you that here in Seattle. We have the plants to thank for that, don't we? Cut down enough forests and the rain disappears, as it is today in the Amazon. As the world heats up, who is it that is creating islands of shade and oases that buffer the urban heat island effects? But the trees, doing sophisticated air conditioning without using a single watt of electricity. They don't ruin the land, they heal it. They are our teachers of restoration. And when we think about this, so many of our climate solutions are based in technology and policy, all important things, but we need equal investments in nature-based solutions, in land-based solutions that rely on nature's inherent capacity to heal, to regulate climate as well. But very importantly, as we do the work of helping the land to buffer climate change, we can't be kicking Indigenous peoples out of their homelands in order to have that happen. So this is where we also have the issues of social justice aligned with the notions of climate justice as well. But the sad truth is that even if we could replant all of the forests, right now it's not enough. We've simply put too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for that to be the short-term solution. We have crippled the planet's ability to respond. And so they need us. They need us to do our part as well. We need to encourage them, but we have to change ourselves. System change, not climate change. They're part of the solution. But we know that things like individual acts of reducing our carbon footprint, yes, collectively that's important, but really what we need to do is to understand the ways in which corporations and governments are at scale creating impacts that far dwarf our individual actions. And they are constantly incentivizing the destruction for private gain over the common good. And it is time to imagine and implement a new green economy which is taught to us by the plants. But while we do that, heading down the green path, let's remember the teachings of the seventh fire prophecy, that we turn around, pick up, and retrieve what was left for us by our ancestors so that we can go in a good way down that green path. We're asking really, how could we be good students? If plants are our teachers, how can we be better students? And as every teacher will tell you, you should pay attention, right? That's what we really need to do, is to pay attention. Pay attention to plants. We suffer in this country from what conservation biologists have called plant blindness, and we simply don't understand and honor the gifts that plants give for us. For example, think about our grandparents who knew hundreds of plants. They had to, because they were raising them. They're their medicine, their food, right? But today, it has been studied and reported that the average American school child, or you, I see you doing it right now, can recognize 100 different corporate logos and 10 plants. Think about that. And actually, on that list of 10 plants, one of them's Christmas tree. So that would be 9, right? So is it any wonder that we live in a society that recognizes legal personhood for corporations and no legal standing at all for birch trees and for blue jays? Here's a powerful need for system change when corporations are granted rights of personhood, but living beings are not. We have to change that, and we are. Knowing the names of plants and birds and everyone around us is an act of respect. It's an act of reciprocity to say that I want to know you so that I can stand up for you. Naming is not just a matter of respect, it can actually be a tool for transformation, which is the last thing, almost the last thing that I want to share with you. Because recognition of the personhood of all beings through knowing their names leads to this idea of the personhood of all beings. That, again, back to that fictional pyramid of human exceptionalism, we're not the only ones here who are persons. And what you're looking at here, as perhaps some of you know, is the sacred Wanganui River of the Maori people. And the Maori people have for decades been advocating for the recognition of the rights of personhood for their river. And just a few years ago, they were successful in such negotiations. The Wanganui River now has legal rights of personhood, the right to be undammed, the right to be clean, the right to have all the relatives swimming freely in that water. This notion of the rights of nature, of the personhood of all beings, is grounded in Indigenous philosophy. And this notion of the personhood of nature finds its way into the constitutions of indigenous-led nations like Bolivia and Ecuador, who are using the rights of nature to defend their lands against oil companies and corporations. And before the United Nations today, there is still the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth awaiting passage. Well, if we are going to have a world in which we recognize the personhood of our more than human relatives, we're going to need language to talk about that. And this may lie in indigenous languages. So often the erasure of indigenous languages is one of the most powerful tools of colonization, isn't it? Think about the way that our notion of land was colonized to say that land is natural resources, not a gift. I think one of the most pernicious examples of linguistic imperialism is this little tiny word here. It seems innocuous enough, doesn't it? But let's think about this, that when we look at that butterfly, that robin, that bloodroot, that bear, in English we refer to them as it, unless we know their names. And for the most part, we don't know their names anymore. And so in English, we say it about that strawberry. It is growing, right? It is eating, it is singing. Now, would I ever say that, I see Bryce right here, so would I ever say of Bryce, it is sitting in the front row? I wouldn't. Thank you for laughing, but it's kind of a nervous laugh, like, oh no, I wouldn't do that. What did I just do to Bryce? What did I do if my grandmother came across the stage and I said, oh look, it's bringing a cup of tea? Do we ever it one another? We never do, because it steals personhood, it objectifies, doesn't it, right? And yet in English is constructed to it our more than human relatives and give us personhood, only us. Human exceptionalism built into our language. Is it any wonder that English is the language of capitalism? It's not a coincidence. Itting the world rather than personifying the world gives us permission for exploitation. So how could we heal this? I think about, as a scientist, when I'm writing papers and I have to it the plants that have taught me so much for year after year. It's wrong. It feels so wrong. And so I worked with my language teacher, the late Stuart King Bunn, and I asked Stuart, I said, what is the word in our language for just a being, so that we don't say it? Could we somehow learn a grammar of animacy in English so that we don't have to speak disrespectfully of the land? And could we think about how to create for English, inspired by Potawatomi languages, a new pronoun? And working with my wonderful language teacher, he told me that we do have a way to say a being of the earth, not an object, a being of the earth, and that word is bemadiziaki. I didn't think that bemadiziaki was going to slip into English anytime soon to replace it. But the last part of that word is aki, which means the earth. And the last part of that word, ki, that syllable is unclaimed in the English language. What if we could speak of our brother Mako here as he, or she, or it, or ki? Couldn't we speak of the living world with a respectful pronoun and say ki is eating berries? Yeah, try it. I've worked it with my students have done these experiments. They say, yeah, I stumble over it a little bit, but once I get it, it really makes me happy. So try it. And you know, in this world, we're also going to need, if we're going to start to use ki, we also need to have a plural pronoun. And one of the ways that you can pluralize things in Budwe Wabmin Wen is to add an N. Kin are flying home from the winter. Welcome back. What would it be like to speak of the earth as kin, rather than as it, rather than as things? This is a transformation. These are the pronouns of the revolution that can change our worldview from itting the world to loving the world, to kinship. Try it. I am going to close, if it's okay. I know I'm going a little bit over here, but could I leave you with a story? Is that okay? You willing to? Yeah? Okay. That feels really important to this moment. And I first heard this story from elder of mine, Tom Porter, at Ganajo Halege. He's a Mohawk elder at Ganajo Halege. And he had this deerskin bag in his hand, and he poured it out, and there were all these stones that came out of the bag. And he said, let me tell you about this. And this story is connected to our creation story. When Sky Woman came here from the sky world, she had a daughter, and there were 2 children born. In the womb of her daughter were twin boys who were known as Flint and Sapling. And you know how kids can be. Those twins inside their mother's womb were elbowing each other and said, it's really crowded in here. And one of the twins said, I'm getting out of here. And one of the other twins said, you know, there's a way this happens. We are the first people born on Earth, but there's a way that this happens. But the one who was named Flint was impatient, and he took his flint knife and cut his way out of his mother's womb, and she died. And it was Sky Woman, their grandmother, who raised them. And this is their story. You see in those boys that they were very different in their way of being in the world. We don't call them the evil twin and the good twin. We say that they are the forces of creation and destruction that are always with us, that shape the world. And these 2 boys went about trying to shape the world for the people to come. And Sapling, he did things like make blackberries for us. Ooh, so delicious. But then Flint said, I'm putting thorns on those. Sapling made the rivers run both directions, so you never had to paddle upstream. But Flint fixed that. There's a lot of stories like this. You see the pattern. And it was decided between these boys that who was going to prevail in the world was going to be determined by a game. A game we know today as the Peach Stone game. To decide the fate of the world, they decided to match their skills in what we know today as, oops, I better get you that slide, the Peach Stone game. There we go, the Peach Stone game. And the players use a set of so-called stones, often peach pits, painted on one side white and the other side has been blackened. And the player shakes the bowl, tosses the stones up into the air, and only when all the stones have turned one way or the other would a winner be declared, and the fate of life on Earth decided. If all the stones came up black, then Flint would prevail, and destruction would be loosed upon the world. Should they all fall white, then the world would continue under the generous hand of creation. They played, and they played without a winner. They tossed the seeds for hours, back and forth, back and forth. And with every throw, 2 boys gambled with the future of the world. Would life continue as we know it, or would all be lost? It's such an ancient story, and yet could not feel more contemporary as we are today, gambling with the future of the earth, with the continuity of life. On and on the boys played all night until the glimmer of light at the eastern horizon warned them that time was almost up. They could make one more throw as the pink of dawn colored their faces. The stones flew into the air for the last time and began to clatter down into the bowl. The first one came up black, and the next, and the next, and the next. All the stones were black until there was only a single seed still hanging in the air, tumbling and spinning on its way to the bowl to join the others. And all the other beings watched in terror as humans gambled with the continuity of life. And at the moment when all life hung in the balance, it is said that all members of creation, all the trees, the berries, the grasses, the birds, the four-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, all drew in their breaths as that last stone tumbled, and together all of creation gave a mighty shout. Its force caused the human foolishness to be overruled, and the power of their voices turned that last stone over as it fell into the dish. The color of trillium blooming in the spring, of mother's milk, of moonlit snow, the color of a polar bear. I've tried to imagine the sound of that mighty shout, the roars, the panting, the swishing of grasses. And in my imagination, I feel rather than hear their voices, large and small. There are chirps and hoots, buzzes, howls and flutters, scrapes, squeaks, leaf flutters, needle whispers, spine quivers, buds swelling, seeds bursting, roots pushing, spores popping, and the vibration of the membrane in the smallest microbe, all coalesced in a great wailing wind, so cohesive in strength and direction that it stops the seed, spins it around, holds it poised in midair, and sets it down, life side up. It was the mighty shout of creation that saved the beautiful world, but we are gambling again with the fate of the earth. The plants, the birds, the salamanders, the starfish are all trying to make that mighty shout, but we have weakened them to the points that their voices are threadbare and faint. Their raspy whisper can barely be heard over the roar of the bulldozers. All this time they have stood for us, and we have paid them with betrayal, with silence as destruction reigns. Now it is we humans who must give the mighty shout. Miigwech Bizendawiyak. Thank you for listening.
Okay, great. Okay, so the first question is from Peg, and it is, clearly we know how and why humans communicate, and we have some ideas about animals. How can we be more purposeful in teaching our students about how plants communicate?
Oh, wow, what a wonderful question. You know, there's a way that, I mentioned plant blindness. We also, as it turns out, have plant deafness. In a way that our ancestors did not. The notion that we could be attentive to the communications of plants is certainly within our oral tradition, right? How do we do that today? Well, it's paying attention, for one. But plants communicate in ways that are so unlike our own, right? I think oftentimes the way that they live becomes a metaphor, a teaching for how we might live. You think, how are they solving that environmental problem or that relationship crisis? What are the plants doing about that? You watch them, you sit with them, you see how they live. Plants themselves, of course, are also communicating not with us necessarily, but with one another by pheromones, by gaseous emanations that are carried through the wind, chemicals that can communicate things about stress, about water relations. And so there's all this communication going on in the air, but it turns out there's a lot of communication underground as well, through the mycorrhizal networks, through root grafting, etc. So how do we pay attention to that? We open our minds to the fact that you can communicate without communicating in an animal way. But plants are still doing it. Recently they've actually learned that plants can not only communicate with one another, but plants can hear. Experiments have demonstrated that plants can hear and interpret, for example, the sound of different insects chewing. That sound helps them turn on the biochemistry of protection. You play them the sound of the right insect chomping. They hear it, and then they respond by making the right chemicals. I am so excited by these revolutions in the body of knowledge of plant cognition and communication. But mostly you just have to be really quiet and clear your mind of your own mind so that someone else's can be present.
Glitch. Talking about having voices in your head, maybe. No, not in that way. But do you ever get a Western voice in your head that your spiritual beliefs are a result of evolution? And if so, what is your response to that voice?
If I'm interpreting that question right, are intuitive ways of understanding evolutionary or an evolutionary adaptation? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I read this question differently before I read it out loud, but sometimes I guess, do your Western ways of thinking oftentimes get in the way of how you interact with other organisms and our kin? How does the way that you were brought up within Western education and science, how does that impact your own traditional beliefs, and how do you manage those two voices in your head?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, both of those ways of knowing belong to us, and for me, they don't have to be in opposition to one another. They don't have to be a binary. In the notion within Western science that Western science is the objective Western science, materialist Western science, is the only way to understand the natural world, that honestly isn't science. That's scientism. And so for me, I really think about both Western science and Indigenous science, which is inclusive of ways of communicating and understanding that we would call intuitive and subjective. It isn't a matter of or. To me, it's a matter of and. Use both of those ways of knowing. So for me, that's the navigation and negotiation, is that I don't have to choose. Each of them are tools. They're ways of knowing that are appropriate to different kinds of questions. When you're doing a scientific experiment, you don't use a chromatograph when what you really need is a microscope, right? So I would say that there are times when we need Western intellectual tools, and there are times when we need Indigenous intellectual tools. That's the beauty of two-eyed seeing. It gives us more tools to understand the world. That's a much longer question, but there was a short-ish answer. Yeah.
Thank you. We'd like to invite people to come down to the mics and ask questions for the next 15 minutes or so. So if you have a question, please come on up,
Don't be shy. It is such a gift for a writer to hear from readers, so bring it on. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Robin. I'm curious, as we think about the number of people on this planet and the need that they have to eat, and the use of there's the industrialization of food and chemicals used for food, and there's a movement toward organics and regenerative farming and so on. I'm just wondering, in your journey as a scientist and as a student of Indigenous ways of knowing, if you see a path forward in a food system that is capable of feeding us in a way that is not destructive. And that would include, maybe it would include the use of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides. I don't know, but they have impacts on our environment that we now are beginning to understand. We have algal blooms in the Gulf of Mexico because of over-fertilization and so on. I'm just curious what you see on the horizon in terms of how these two ways of knowing come together, especially as it relates to feeding people.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And obviously, there's a lot of ways to answer that and a lot of depth, but I would say that to me, the important thing is in regenerative agriculture, we're talking about circular, reciprocal engagements, that we're not just taking from the land, we're not just exploiting soil and letting it wash down the rivers, right? That we're engaged in a cyclical, reciprocal relationship, so that as we take food from the soil, we also feed the soil. All right? The way that the natural world does. There are no extractive lines in the natural world. It all operates as a circle. So in a way, biomimicry, say, how does the world feed itself? How do natural processes feed all of these organisms? It's by protecting the life-giving forces of soil and water. This is, for me, one of those things that is so deeply troubling, because we know what to do. We know what regenerative farming looks like. And for the most part, what I'm hearing anyway, and I'd love to learn more about it, is that small family farms, people who are going to stay on the land forever, that want that land to be sustainable so they can pass it on and be a good ancestor, they're beginning to really use the tools of regenerative agriculture. But a lot of corporate agriculture is saying, well, we'll use it up and go on someplace else. But the thing is, of course, there isn't anyplace else. I will also say that one of the other elements, if we look at natural models for regenerative agriculture, we also know that systems crash when too much is taken. And in many cases, they can't bounce back after that. And so that too is a cautionary tale from living systems. Reciprocity in all things. Put a cover crop on that soil.
Hi. My name is Aaron McKenna. I'm Yupik. And I had a question about how you share your stories. And if you had any advice for young people that have their Indigenous stories and our worldviews we want to share, and we're afraid of it being extracted and used in ways we don't believe in.
Yes. It's such an important question. Our stories, there are lots of different kinds of stories, right? In Potawatomi, we have different names for different kinds of stories. There are sacred stories, there are teaching stories, there are day-to-day stories, and they all fall into different bins, right? And the stories that I choose to share are ones that are usually referred to as teaching stories, that are meant to teach a lesson more broadly. And those stories, with permission from who shared the story with me, I feel strongly about sharing those, because that's what they're for. They're to provide guidance to all of us. There are also lots of stories that are not shared outside of the culture. And one of the things that feels important about cultural sharing when we're worried not only about appropriation but about misuse and misinterpretation is to do our best when we're sharing to first share responsibility for that knowledge before the knowledge is shared. That's the way our elders always taught us, right? You have to show that you're responsible for that knowledge before someone will share it with you. And I think it's incumbent upon us as well to provide guidance in what these mean and how to use them so that they are not misused. But you know what? I also want to say that that's not just our responsibility as Indigenous story sharers. It's the responsibility of the listeners, right? It's your work too, to listen and not damage those stories, not change those stories, not misuse them. So it's both the storyteller and the story listener have a responsibility here. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, if you want to take it away.
Yes, I would. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So something that I love about your writing, and you talked quite a bit about it this evening too, is the importance of names. I know a few months ago you wrote something for Emergence magazine, and you shared how many names the surface berry has. And it's just, I don't have a question, more as like, if you want to talk more about names or share more like about your maybe own personal background related to the names of non-human organisms. Just,
Oh yeah, sure,
yeah.
happy to.
Okay,
That is
thank
a
you.
question. That is
Okay.
a question. Yeah, it feels like if you're in your neighborhood or in your dorm and you don't learn the names of the people around you, what are the consequences of that? Isolation. If you don't know the person's name, are you going to go borrow something from them that you really need? Are they going to help you if you need help and you don't even know their name? You haven't created relationship. Naming helps to create relationship. So by parallel, how can we live in the world and not know the names of the birds and the trees and the flowers and the butterflies who are around us? You know, to me, it contributes to what eco-psychologists have called species loneliness. Yeah, species loneliness, that we feel disconnected from our kinfolk, from our more than human kinfolk, who can quite literally do every day, save our lives. The least we could do is to know their names. So it brings you into relationship, it deepens your experience of the natural world, and I'll say, it's not just because I'm a botany professor that I think everybody should go learn the names. And you know what? I don't care that you learn the scientific name or even the official common name, but I care that you know them. You could have your own name for them. Right? What matters is that you know them and that you have relationship, because how can they help you and how can you help them if you don't even know their names?
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys.